Hello again, friends. We continue with the early beginning of Spooky Month. Although we might just call this Lovecraft Month, a month I hope never to repeat. But onward we go. Last week, we learned about the creepy town of Dunwich, not to be confused with the lovely town of Dunwich in England. We also learned about our main character, Wilbur, who is clearly a squid in a person suit, I think. Oh, and just for Brick's journey, we will be using Dance Macabre by Sansons, performed by Abydos Music, provided by the wonderful Pixabay.com. I mean, you did request it, right? Excuse me. Now that we're all caught up, let's read The Dunwich Horror Part 2. Meanwhile, old Wattley continued to buy cattle without measurably increasing the size of his herd. He also cut timber and began to repair the unused parts of his house, a spacious peaked roof affair whose rear end was buried entirely in the rocky hillside, and whose 3 least ruined ground floor rooms had always been sufficient for himself and his daughter. There must have been prodigious reserves of strength in the old man to enable him to accomplish so much hard labor, and though he babbled dementedly at times, his carpentry seemed to shew the efforts of sound calculation, and had already begun as soon as Wilbur was born. When one of the many tool sheds had been put suddenly in order, clapboarded, and fitted with a stout, fresh lock. Now, in restoring the abandoned upper story of the house, he was a no less thorough craftsman. His mania shewed itself only in his tight boarding up of all the windows in the reclaimed section, though many declared that it was a crazy thing to bother with the reclamation at all. Less inexplicable was his fitting up of another downstairs room for his new grandson, a room which several callers saw, though no one was ever admitted to the closely boarded upper story. This chamber he lined with tall, firm shelving, along which he began gradually to arrange, in apparently careful order, all the rotting ancient books and parts of books, which during his own day had been heaped promiscuously in odd corners of various rooms. "I made some use of 'em," he would say, as he tried to mend a torn black-letter page with paste prepared on the rusty kitchen stove. "But the boy's fitting to make better use of 'em. He ought to have 'em as well, sort as he can, for they're going to be all of his larning. I feel that larning might be a good idea for the whole family, specifically at some institution or another. Like a college. That's what I meant, really." When Wilbur was a year and 7 months old, in September of 1914, his size and accomplishments were almost alarming. He had grown as large as a child of 4, and was a fluent and incredibly intelligent talker. He ran freely about the fields and hills, and accompanied his mother on all her wanderings. That's because squids mature faster than people. At home, he would pore diligently over the queer pictures and charts in his grandfather's books, while old Watterly would instruct and catechize him through long, hushed afternoons. By this time, the restoration of the house was finished, and those who watched it wondered why one of the upper windows had been made into a solid plank door. It was a window in the rear of the east gable end, close against the hill, and no one could imagine why a cleated wooded runway was built up to it from the ground. Maybe it's going to be a fun slide. About the period of this work's completion, people noticed that the old tool house, tightly locked and windowlessly clapboarded since Wilbur's birth, had been abandoned again. The door swung listlessly open, and when Earl Sawyer once stepped within after a cattle-selling call on old Watterly, he was quite discomposed by the singular odor he encountered. Such a stench he averred, as he had never smelt in all his life except near the Indian circles on the hills, and which could not come from anything sane or of this earth. But then, the homes and sheds of Dunwich folk have never been remarkable for olfactory immaculateness. He means everything smelled bad, but in a fancy way. The following months were void of visible events, save that everyone swore to a slow but steady increase in the mysterious hill noises. On May Eve of 1915, there were tremors, which even the Aylesbury people felt, whilst the following Halloween produced an underground rumbling queerly synchronized with bursts of flame. "Them witch Watley's doing." From the summit of Sentinel Hill, Wilbur was growing up uncannily, and so that he looked like a boy of 10 as he entered his 4th year. He read avidly by himself now, but talked much less than formerly. A settled taciturnity was absorbing him, and for the first time people began to speak specifically of the dawning look of evil in his goatish face. He would sometimes mutter in unfamiliar jargon, and chant in bizarre rhythms which chilled the listener with a sense of unexplainable terror. The aversion displayed toward him by dogs had now become a matter of wide remark, and he was obliged to carry a pistol in order to traverse the countryside in safety. His occasional use of the weapon did not enhance his popularity amongst the owners of canine guardians. A few callers at the house would often find Lavinia alone on the ground floor, while odd cries and footsteps resounded in the boarded-up section. She would never tell what her father and the boy were doing up there, though once she turned pale and displayed an admirable degree of fear when a jocose fish peddler tried the locked door leading to the stairway. That peddler told the store loungers at Dunwich Village that he thought he heard a horse stamping on that floor above. The loungers reflected, thinking of the door and runway, and of the cattle that so swiftly disappeared. "Oh, how sweet! He made the cows house pets!" Then they shuddered as they recalled tales of old Wateley's youth, and the strange things that are called out of the earth when a bullock is sacrificed at the proper time to certain heathen gods. It had for some time been noticed that the dogs had begun to hate and fear the whole Wateley place as violently as they hated and feared Wilbur personally. 1917, the war came, and Squire Sawyer Wateley, as chairman of the local draft board, had hard work finding a quota of young Dunwich men, fit even to be sent to a development camp. The government, alarmed at such signs of wholesale regional decadence, sent several officers and medical experts to investigate, conducting a survey which New England newspaper readers may still recall. It was the publicity attending this investigation which set reporters on the track of the Wateleys and caused the Boston Globe and Arkham Advisor to print flamboyant Sunday stories of young Wilbur's precociousness, old Wateley's black magic, the shelves of strange books, the sealed second story of the ancient farmhouse, and the weirdness of the whole region and its hill noises. And suddenly the goth tourism industry began to boom in Dunwich. Wilbur was 4.5 then. He looked like a lad of 15. His lips and cheeks were fuzzy with a coarse dark brown, and his voice had begun to break. Earl Sawyer went out to the Wateley place with both sets of reporters and cameramen and called their attention to the queer stench which now seemed to trickle down from the sealed upper spaces. It was, he said, exactly like a smell he had found in the tool shed, abandoned when the house was finally repaired, and like the faint odors which he sometimes thought he caught near the stone circles of the mountains. Dunwich folk read the stories when they appeared and grinned over the obvious mistakes. Silly reporters. Ritual sacrifice is only spelled with one F. They wondered, too, why the writers made so much of the fact that old Whately always paid for his cattle in gold pieces of extremely ancient date. The Wattleys had received their visitors with ill-concealed distaste, though they did not dare court further publicity by a violent resistance or refusal to talk. For a decade, the annals of the Wattleys sink indistinguishably into the general life of a morbid community used to their queer ways and hardened to their May Eve and All Hallows orgies. You know, remind me never to go anywhere near there during Halloween. Twice a year, they would light fires on the top of Sentinel Hill, which at times the mountain rumblings would recur with greater and greater violence, while at all seasons there were strange and portentous doings at the lonely farmhouse. In the course of time, callers professed to hear sounds in the sealed upper story, even when all the family were downstairs, and they wondered how swiftly or how lingeringly a cow or bullock was usually sacrificed. There was talk of a complaint to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but nothing ever came of it, since Dunwich folks are never anxious to call the outside world's attention to themselves. Gee, I wonder why. About 1923, when Wilbur was a boy of 10, whose mind, voice, stature, and bearded face gave all the impressions of maturity, a second great siege of carpentry went on at the old house. It was all inside the sealed upper part, and from bits of discarded lumber, people concluded that the youth and his grandfather had knocked out all the partitions and even removed the attic floor, leaving only one vast open void between the ground story and the peaked roof. And that was when the roof collapsed, because they had removed all the load-bearing walls. They had torn down the great chimney, too, and fitted the rusty range with a flimsy outside tin stovepipe. In the spring, after this event, old Whately noticed the growing number of whippoorwills that would come out of Cold Spring Glen to chirp under his window at night. He seemed to regard the circumstances as one of great significance, and told the loungers at Osborne's that he thought his time had almost come. "They whistle just in tune with my breathing now," he said, "and I guess they're getting ready to catch my soul. They know it's a-going about, and don't calculate to miss it. You'll know, boys, after I'm gone, whether they get me or not. If they do, they'll keep up a-singing and laughing till break o' day. If they don't, they'll kinder quiet down like. I expect them at the souls they hunts for have some pretty tough tussles sometimes." On Limness night, 1924, Dr. Hooton of Aylesbury was hastily summoned by Wilbur Whately, who had lashed his one remaining horse through the darkness and telephoned from Osborne's in the village. He found old Whately in a very grave state, with a cardiac action and stertorous breathing that told of an end not far off. The shapeless albino daughter and oddly bearded grandson stood by the bedside, whilst from the vacant abyss overhead there came a disquieting suggestion of rhythmical surging or lapping, as of the waves on some level beach. The doctor, though, was chiefly disturbed by the chattering night birds outside, the seemingly limitless legion of whippoorwills that cried their endless message in repetitions timed diabolically to the wheezing gasp of the dying man. It was uncanny and unnatural. Too much, thought Dr. Horton, like the whole of the region he had entered so reluctantly in response to the urgent call. Toward 1 o'clock, old Whately gained consciousness and interrupted his wheezing to choke out a few words to his grandson. More space, Willie. More space soon. You grows, and that grows faster. You'll be ready to serve you soon, boy. Open up the gates to Yog Sothoth with the long chant that you'll find on page 751 of the complete edition, and then put a match to the prison. Fire from earth can't burn it nohow. And it was at that time that Dr. Houghton had the two remaining Waddleys committed for their own safety. He was obviously quite mad, and after a pause, during which the flock of whippoorwills outside adjusted their cries to the altered tempo, while the indications of the strange hill noise came from afar off, he added another sentence or two. Feed it regular, Willie, and mind the quantity, but don't let it grow too fast for the place, for if it bursts quarters or gets out afore you opens to Yog Sothoth, it's all over and no use. Only them from beyond kin make it multiply and work. Only them, the old ones as wants to come back. And after committing the family, Dr. Houghton set ablaze to the entire house and quarantined the whole town. But speech gave place to gasps again. Lavinia screamed at the way the whippoorwills followed the change. It was the same for more than an hour. When the fine, throaty rattle came, Dr. Houghton drew sunken lids over the glazing gray eyes as the tumult of birds faded imperceptibly to silence. Lavinia sobbed, but Wilbur only chuckled whilst the night noises rumbled faintly. They didn't get him, he muttered in his heavy bass voice. Wait, does that mean his soul is just hanging around? I am not okay with this. Wilbur was by this time a scholar of really tremendous erudition in his one-sided way, and was quietly known by correspondence to many librarians in distant places where rare and forbidden books of old days are kept. He was more and more hated and dreaded around Dunwich because of certain youthful disappearances which suspicion laid vaguely at his door, but was always able to silence inquiry through fear, or through use of that fund of old-time gold which still, as in his grandfather's time, went forth regularly and increasingly for cattle buying. He was now tremendously mature of aspect, and his height having reached the normal adult limit, seemed to incline to wax beyond that figure. In 1925, when a scholarly correspondent from Miskatonic University called upon him one day and departed pale and puzzled, he was fully 6 3/4 feet tall. Oh, so he's a giant squid. Look out, Captain Nemo! Through all the years, Wilbur had treated his half-deformed albino mother with a growing contempt, finally forbidding her to go to the hills with him on May Eve and Hallowmass. And in 1926 the poor creature complained to Mamie Bishop of being afraid of him. "There's more about him as I knows than I can tell ye, Mamie," she said. "And nowadays there's more nor what I know myself. I'll vow for God I don't know what he wants, nor what he's a-trying to do." That Halloween, the hill noises sounded louder than ever, and fire burned on Sentinel Hill as usual. But people paid more attention to the rhythmical screaming of vast flocks of unnaturally belated whippoorwills, which seemed to be assembled near the unlighted Waddleys' farmhouse. They're still looking for a Waddley. After midnight, their shrill noises burst into a kind of pandemoniac cachinnation, which filled the countryside, and not until dawn did they finally quiet down. "All right, Lovecraft, hand over the thesaurus and nobody gets hurt." Then they vanished, hurrying southward, where they were fully a month overdue. What this meant, no one could be quite certain till later. None of the country folk seemed to have died, but poor Lavinia Wattley, the twisted albino, was never seen again. Dun, dun, dun! Now she can have a lovely tour of death. In the summer of 1927, Wilbur repaired 2 sheds in the farmyard and began moving his books and effects out to them. Soon afterwards, Earl Sawyer told the loungers at Osborne that more carpentry was going on in the Whately farmhouse. Wilbur was closing all the doors and windows on the ground floor, and seemed to be taking out partitions as he and his grandfather had done upstairs 4 years before. He was living in one of the sheds, and Sawyer thought he seemed unusually worried and tremulous. People generally suspected him of knowing something about his mother's disappearance, and very few ever approached his neighborhood now. His height had increased to more than 7 feet, and showed no signs of ceasing its development. And that's the end of the chapter. That's it.
Seriously?
Seriously.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking. It just stopped. Kind of a weird place to leave it.
Yeah.
Well, now comes the time when I ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Check out the channel for many wonderful fairy tales and join us next week to find out what happens in the Dunwich Horror. There is always the notification bell if you would like to be notified when I put out new videos. An amazingly huge thank you to the contributors of Pixabay.com, for whom I cannot thank enough. I'm trying to put all in the credits in the description below if you ever want to know where I get my wonderful toys. If you would like to support me on Patreon, Instagram, or Facebook, there are links in the description below. But most of all, I want to thank you, my wonderful friends, for being here with me. You make it all worthwhile. Now a special thank you for my Patreon friends.